I met a neighbour. And, well, they're fundraising. Hello everyone and welcome to the attack on Copenhagen. Now before we begin, why was I late this evening? Well, it's very simple. I was walking the floss as I normally do before this, and one of my neighbours came up and went, "Hi Alex, how you doing?" I went, "Hi Jeff, how are you doing?" "I'm running the London Marathon." "You are?" "Whatever possessed you?" Anyway, in a nicest story, it's running in honor of his mum, and it's to support Brain Cancer UK, and so I put a link below. But this is why I was late this evening, because, you know, I'm British. You get caught by a neighbour who you actually quite like as far as your neighbours go, and getting away from them is a delicate matter in how polite can I be whilst also simultaneously ending this conversation before we have for some reason promised to meet up for drinks or have a meal at some point, which neither of us really wants to do, but because of the whole repetitiveness of British politeness, we will end up agreeing to. So it's fun. Apparently the audio is not right. Let me find out why the audio is not right. There. So. Microphone, default microphone Razer Siren Elite. How is that? Is that audio better? Audio is muffled. Audio is muffled? I'm not sure. Some static, etc. I will have to check. I'll have to check today's recording of tomorrow's video. Still static. Oh. Much better now. Audio loud and clear now. So I wonder what the audio issue was. And now really loud. Okay. Is that better? Remembering I can't hear this. Whatever you change after you read muffled, put it back. How's that? That better? The jack is all the way in the port. It's a USB jack. That better? Still static. I wonder what you're getting the static off. Currently you're missing me having fun with the mic issue matcher. Less static. Okay. How's that? We'll see if that's working. Now hearing in HD. That's good. So is that better? Touch of white noise, but nothing distracting. Alright, well hopefully that is better. And that sort of sorts out the problems. Now I am going to have to check out tomorrow's video tonight after I finish this, aren't I? Oh, caramba. So, I need a drink. As I was saying though, the reason I'm late, if you look below me in the description, there's a link to a fundraising page. And the reason I'm late is because while I was walking the dogs, I was caught up by one of my neighbours, who is a very nice gentleman. We are as close as British neighbours can be, without actually trying to be close at all. And
And, well, basically, they're running the London Marathon to raise money for the Brain Trust in the UK, because their mum died about 10 years ago from something. I was paying attention, honestly, but my brain has now since fried it. And yeah, basically I was held up, and it was a nice reason to be held up, but we were trying to get through it as quickly as possible without either one of us ending up doing it through the niceness of British interactions, of ending up agreeing to having an evening together at some point down a pub or something like that, and then having to suffer through that. That's good. That's good. I'm wondering if it's because I cleaned out the computer today and cleaned all the dust out. So, not sure what that's doing. Alright, could always be the fridges actually. Right, iron brew. So, the attack on Copenhagen in 1801 following Danish operations in Danish waters. Let's see. Let's put in a note for saying bad sound issues. And we've got to roughly... Oh, wait. Oh. Yes, exactly, brain aneurysm. And, yes. Very nice. My my neighbour, a very nice gentleman, is doing the London Marathon. And so that chatting away with him was what I am running a few minutes late, because believe it or not, this might sound strange, but the fluffy research assistant does not consider sitting while I'm talking to a neighbour to be part of his dog walk. He considers that time doesn't count as anything other than time when I should be patting him, and therefore the walk is not in any way shortened. Right, let's say hello to people. Hello Byron, hello Peter, hello Bichon, hello John Shea, hello Michael Gooch, hello Night 68 Front. Thank you Roland Cash, thank you Glenn Stewart, thank you Alzaski. Thank you for being a member for 7 months, Roland. That's really nice of you. Thank you, Carl Gansberg. Thank you, Tanoff. Thank you, DH89. Thank you... Nice everyone. Yes, 5 minutes late. Dog walk and neighbour, talking with a neighbour in Britain. That was absolutely amazingly quick, actually. This is report on the first signs of AI we were trying to have. Excellent is alive. Hello, Dan Freeman. Hello DG40, hello Joshonk, hello New IQA 442, hello History Vanguard. Thank you everyone for your help with the sound issues. Hello Paul Beswick. Now, the reason why bilge pumps has been delayed was we had some issues last week. And then we sort of went, well, hang on, we're going to be doing this and it's all going to be dominated by AUKUS anyway, so we might as well wait till AUKUS has come out so we can talk about what AUKUS has actually said. And hopefully have some good people on to discuss what AUKUS about. Hopefully. Thank you, Tanef. Thank you, Malaga. Thank you, Seneca Nero. That reminds me, I've got to put this on charge. If I don't put it on charge, then it will get very angry with me. as only a Fitbit watch can do. Just starts going, I am now cutting off this function, and I'm cutting off this function. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the attack on Copenhagen in 1801. Now, and following operations in Danish waters. Now, this is always an interesting thing to start talking about because, as a rule, you get one of two approaches come through. And when I say one of two approaches, I mean one of two approaches, and I have had this before when talking about Copenhagen. You have to remember that there is a lot of other stuff that does go on at the same time, but also that some people still to this day feel, rather like the Mademoiselle Kabir, it was incredibly wrong for the British to do this. Now, here is the problem. You are acting out of all reasonable assumptions for your own protection. You cannot make that good case. However, you cannot govern the perception of your actions in the minds of others. And when you look at some of the raw stats for what was being organised, you can understand why the British, especially with the person who was leading the organisation, Tsar Paul I, you can understand how the British end up reacting the way they do. There is that old scenario. You're presuming the other person is going to see things exactly the same way as you do. It's the same from British perspective. Others do not see it from the exact same perspective as they do. The British might run through some very nice rules and admiralty courts, etc., but they're still creating issues. Now, tribal battles and darings. Shameless book plug. Right. So, you have to always think this through in context. So, I'm going to start off by probably upsetting both sides of this who are watching. Those who believe Britain's always right, we're not. We're just not. And those who believe that Britain shouldn't have done it. Yes, they should. Because both are correct. There is a logical argument for why the Danish, etc., and others are acting the way they are doing. And there is a logical reason for why the British react the way they do. And the fact that that these things end up happening means neither sides are in the wrong for it happening, but it happens. There is events. Bad events can happen with both sides having a legitimate reason for their actions. I know, that's scary. There can be battles where there are no good guys and no bad guys. This is one of them. This is one of those scenarios. You can say it's terrible because civilians and a lot of people get hurt in the ensuing battle because it's a naval battle fought within a port. And naval battles are massive artillery duels. They're not supposed to be fought within confined spaces. You're right. That does make it pretty bad. But there again, the Danish fleet didn't decide to go out and engage the British in the open ocean because that would have been pretty darn stupid. So the only place for the British to go to defeat the British fleet was in the port. Why do the British need to be there to do it? Because they had to break up the League of Armed Neutrality. because honestly, as far as they were concerned, any league, no matter how, any league headed by Tsar Paul I wasn't going to be armed and neutral for long. Thank you, Glenn. So along the lines of, just because I'm not right in punching you in the face doesn't mean I shouldn't actually have punched you in the face. It's this. You hear three people who are not exactly your some people who are not exactly your friends, but not exactly enemies, acquaintances, and someone who is mercurial to an enemy at best, are getting together and forming a club. And that club is going to exist to prevent you from exercising one of the things you do to win your war against someone else. And you take preventative action to start breaking that club up. That's what the British are doing. Now, what you were doing in the first place, it's perfectly natural because it is a rather large blockade and that you're taking ships which are going to French ports. And occasionally there are mistakes made. And issues happen, and that's what prize courts sort out, but those can take a long, long time to sort out. You can't afford, though, for a League of Armed Neutrality to be formed, because what happens if that person who's mercurial persuades that league to then join with the French? Then you're dealing with a massive coalition against you. The British know about coalition building. That's what they do against the war in wars of the French. The British build coalitions. When the British can't build coalitions, they lose. So when they see someone else building a coalition, they have a problem. They also have a problem in this scenario, and we'll be getting into this, because of the First League of Armed Neutrality. The First League of Armed Neutrality had been formed by Catherine the Great. And that had been during the American Revolutionary War. And it's arguable that was an even more decisive impact on British war efforts than the French, because of the sheer amount of things that tied down monitoring that. So there are issues here. You guys might be preparing to attack me as a group. Therefore, if you put this in a scenario, if we want to put it into people punching people and go down to such a basic scenario, it's you've got a group of people getting together looking very shifty, and you're able to catch one of them on their own before they gang up. Do you take them out? You don't kill them, but you damage them, and so you damage them, and so knock them out of the fighting in a way, and stop them being able to potentially part of the group. It's a preemptive strike. And those are things these days which we all understand. Again, it's not exactly a nice thing to do. But basically, Copenhagen is a good scenario of don't look for good guys and bad guys in nation-state politics. Look for realism. Look for realisticness, and look for the reality. So, let's see. Where shall we start? We'll start with what is basically called the English Wars, and this is something which is... How do I put this politely? The English Wars are what mostly these are called in Denmark and Sweden. Englandskrigen or Englandskrigen. You'll notice they're listed as 1801 and 1807 to 1814. Yep. One thing to note is to remember that the British tend to be supported by Sweden in it. So there is another phrase of this being a Scandinavian conflict with outsiders brought in. Denmark, Norway tends to be supported by French and Spain. Now, after Andres Peter Bernstorff, who was a very successful foreign minister of Denmark-Norway, died in 1800, Crown Prince Frederick began exerting his influence. Now, this created issues because it led to the finance minister ignoring protests from the new foreign minister, Christian Bernstorff, to finally grant Frederick de Koninck, who was a major merchant trader in this time, escort for naval convoy to accompany the 40 merchant vessels that they were going to sail on convoy. This convoy was transporting mainly French and Dutch products from the Dutch East Indies to Copenhagen. Now, here is the problem, because the orders given to these convoys by Frederick are that convoys from across the world, if they're setting out for Norway, Denmark, Norway, they are supposed to resist if foreign naval ships attempt to examine the papers or cargoes in the ships under the Danish flag, whatever the size of force the convoy was faced with. Unfortunately, in these convoys were sailing a lot of non-Danish ships, and in order to gain the neutrality benefits and protections. Now, for some reason, Britain, who's attempting to blockade France, etc. at this precise time, is not exactly happy with this idea of feigned neutrality. There's also a problem that you have merchant vessels which have no naval escort are going to be trying to resist warships. Can anyone see the problems which are going to start turning up here? Sorry. That's better. Again, don't get licked in the ear by a corgi. Not quite sure where the tongue's been. In December 1799, English personnel, British personnel in other words, and this is one of the interesting things I find about this war, they quote the English wars against Britain. By this point, the Act of Union has been around for a while. It is Great Britain you're dealing with. It's not England. It's just they're calling it the English because that's what they're calling it. A Danish flagship put into Gibraltar, and it was being attempted to be checked by the British. And an English sailor got killed during the process of the ship being checked. For some reason, this caused trouble, even more so. And then in 1800, when Russia decided to start organising a new League of Armed Neutrality, Britain reacted. Britain sent a squadron of a few ships to inspect a Danish convoy which was actually escorted by a frigate, a 40-gun, the Freya at Ostend. Freya refused their request to search the convoy and check the neutrality the papers of the ships to check that they were all neutrals, and gave battle. But for some reason, finding itself in battle against several frigates and I'm fairly certain a couple of third rates, it was forced to strike its flag. As a result, Denmark, Norway, decided to ask Russia to join the armed neutrality. In August of 1800, a British fleet arrived for the first time off Copenhagen. With the threat of British bombardment, Christian Bernstorff promised to stop convoys temporarily, while Denmark and the United Kingdom set up common rules on how and when convoys were to be used and whether who was supposed to be in them. The British fleet, happy it had done its job, went off. Then the following month, that is September 1800, a Russian ambassador arrives in Denmark. Formal invitation to join the League of Armed Neutrality. And they did that in December 1801, in December 1800. However, unfortunately, in 1801, Tsar Paul I, the same Tsar who's heading the League of Armed Neutrality, signs an alliance with France, agreeing that Russia and France shall close all European ports to British trade. Seeing the problem here? No, we've done nothing apart from join the League of Armed Neutrality, which is headed by this guy, who is now allied with the French, who are fighting you. And they're now demanding we close all ports. So the United Kingdom send notes to the members, demanding that they immediately leave the League, because it's no longer a neutral league, it is now an alliance with France. Hello, Richards. Hello, Kyle. Denmark and Norway, though, feared that actually leaving the League would then make them appear to ally themselves with the United Kingdom and lead to them being invaded by either France or Russia or Sweden or Prussia. So, here is when the issue really starts, because Denmark-Norway believes that they would be able to conduct a naval war with Britain far more successfully than a land war with Prussia, Russia and Sweden, rejected all British proposals for negotiations. And thus, a fleet is sent against Denmark in March 1801. Now, do you see what's happened? Is anyone really at fault? There is a lot of things happening. There is a lot of context going on. There are a lot of these events. Is anyone being a bad person? No. But they are getting sucked along by events. Denmark, you can sort of understand their views. And you can understand what's going on through their mind. You can also understand what's going through on the British mind. You can understand what's going on in the Russian one. Everyone is manoeuvring for their own best interests. And this is the problem for Denmark and Norway. Because they have good interests. But they can't survive this one. And when your options are, well, we think we can do better with a naval war against Britain than a land war against Russia or France. Can we just agree that basically means you're snookered, whatever you do? The thing is, Knight 6831, commerce warfare had worked before. Because this is the first League of Armed Neutrality. And this is where it had worked. Formed in 1873 against the British in the American Revolutionary and Anglo-French Wars, to prevent the British taking neutrals as prizes. However, this league was started and run by Catherine II of Russia, aka Catherine the Great, who is a very different personality to deal with than Tsar Paul I. Without Russia, there isn't much of a league. Tsar Paul was considered basically, well, for putting it mildly, Napoleon's puppet. Especially after his Franco-Russian alliance. But Catherine the Great would never be considered anyone's puppet. The League of Armed Neutrality had meant Britain couldn't do much about French trade in the Baltic, and also couldn't get as much access to supplies in the Baltic as it liked. But it hadn't been an offensive risk to Britain. At no point had they worried that Catherine the Great was going to go to war to attack the British, because frankly it wasn't in her interests. Why are you going to ask? Well, that's a very simple thing. Catherine the Great, the British soon worked out, was very happy as long as Britain and France were fighting each other. Because whilst Britain and France were fighting each other, they weren't a problem for her. They stopped fighting each other, then she has to deal with their attentions on her. John South, it makes me feel almost bad about what happened to them, because they didn't really have a chance either way. Nope, they didn't. The British Empire was still in its growth phase, its early growth phase at this point. And, yeah, Britain loses the American Revolutionary War. But the British learn lessons. And one of them is they start studying the Baltics very, very carefully. And they really do study the Baltics incredibly carefully. And this evening, by the way, after this I'll be in Discord in the general chat. Just a reminder. I will be in Discord in the general chat, general chat, if people want to talk about it afterwards. The British start to really invest from basically the 1870s onwards in a diplomatic and intelligence network in Europe and the wider world. You have to remember, Britain was never more alone than it was during the American Revolutionary War. Oh, 1773. Sorry, typo by me. (1783). It was 1780 to 1783. Was the first League of Armed Neutrality. Sorry, I've spun the 8 and the 7 around. So sorry, that's a lovely dyslexic moment, and I hadn't noticed that one. Let me just check that one and replace it. Yeah, the Revolutionary War is how do I put this? And it's like the Anglo-French War at the time. Britain technically lost, but again ended up with more territory afterwards than they had when they began it. It's one of those scenarios where you lose, but how do you lose? You have to be careful of what the metrics are you use to get lost. Now, basically, the big loss is always treated as, we lost America, so of course it was a loss. Yeah, but longer term it actually worked out quite good. Anyway. There we go. Now, Catherine the Great had successfully managed it, and that Catherine the Great had made it a viable thing, the League of Armed Neutrality. But, well, the Second League, it's headed by that twonker. And I am going to call him a twonker because, let's be honest, he is nowhere near the same quality of leadership as Catherine had been. He just isn't. Tsar Paul I of Russia was Emperor of Russia officially from 1796 until his assassination. Officially the only son of Peter III and Catherine the Great. He was overshadowed for most of his life by his mother, to put it politely. And he has the joy of having been assassinated by his own officers, which tells you his quality. Paul, when he was a child, had been taken over not been raised by his mother Catherine, had been raised by his grandmother Empress Elizabeth. And frankly, he was not really... Well, how do I put this? His governor, who looked after his education, was a guy called Nikita Ivanich Panin. And Panin's nephew, one of actually Paul's theoretically acquaintances as he was growing up, becomes one of Paul's assassins. And that, at best, one of his tutors described him as acting and speaking without reflection. Now, of course, he had the joy of watching his mother engineer a coup, and a coup that basically disposed her husband and had him killed. There is arguments that it might have been other issues that caused him to die, but certainly his death was useful to Catherine. After the death of Peter III, Catherine placed herself on the throne in a very nice ceremony, and Paul stayed on as crown prince. Unfortunately, when he turned 18, Paul and his advisor, Panin, his former governor, believed that he was the rightful Tsar of Russia. Okay, you can tell where this is going to go. And, well, Panin also told him that women couldn't be good leaders, which is obviously quite untrue and might explain his own life expectancy under Catherine the Great. Catherine decided to find him a nice wife and found a minor princess of the Holy Roman Empire. And after he got married, Catherine allowed Paul to attend council in order that he might be trained for his work as emperor. Unfortunately, Wilhelmina died in childbirth in April 1776, 3 years after the wedding. And Catherine started to realise that Paul wanted power, including his own separate court. Some people tried to push for a co-rulership of Russia, but Catherine managed to avoid it. At this point, the rivalry begins between the two. After her daughter-in-law died, Catherine started trying to find another wife for Paul. And on the 7th of October 1776, 6 months after the death of his first wife, Paul married again. This time, it was Sophia Dorothea of Württemberg, who received the new Orthodox name Maria Fedorova. Their first child, Alexander, was born in 1777. And he would go on to become Alexander I, Emperor of Russia from 1801. And first King of the Congress of Poland from 1815, and Grand Duke of Finland from 1809 till his death in 1825. He took after his grandmother. In 1783, the Empress had allowed him to maintain another estate, where he was allowed to maintain a brigade of soldiers, whom he drilled on the Prussian model, which was unpopular at the time, unsurprisingly. And it's also unsurprising that actually Catherine has his own children, Alexander and Constantine, placed under her charge. Paul still got the throne, though, sadly enough. Now, Audrin J, why did the rot... We'll get into that, Audrin, but you're kind of jumping a long way ahead in this history at this point, aren't you? I can understand where the question's coming from, although it didn't actually, but we'll leave that to one side. But we're on the whole forming of the Second League of Armed Neutrality, not on the whole battles afterwards yet, at the precise moment. So I'll answer the question when we get to it. As I see, it sounds like he didn't ask the right advisors what to do before doing it. He didn't. Tsar Paul didn't tend to ask any advisors what to do about it. I'm trying to find polite things to say about him. When Catherine died without regaining consciousness, Paul's first act as emperor was to inquire about and, if possibly, destroy her testament, for fear she would exclude him from succession and leave the throne to Alexander. Which is why he came up with the Pauline laws, which established the strict principle of primogeniture in the House Romanov, of always leaving the throne to the next male heir. The army, which had been poised to attack Persia under Catherine's last design, was recalled. And Paul decided to actually crown his father's remains before they were interned. Yeah. This is the fun part. This is the fun guy. And this is the guy who they got into bed with in terms of forming the Second League of Armed Neutrality. Now, it was supposed to protect neutral shipping against the RN's wartime policies, as we talked about, of searching neutral shipping for French contraband. It didn't really work. In theory, it could work, okay? In theory, there is a possibility there it could work. But there's a small problem about its timeline of its organization. Because when it's formed, and when they start getting it, it's of course formed over the winter. It's formed over the winter of 1800 to 1801. That's not a good time if you're in the Baltic. Being formed over winter is not a good time. Why? Because you can't move. Alzowski, by right advisors I mean us who depose them. Actually, honestly, there is actually a reality in that. Right advisors, anyone with half a brain would have been quite useful. People who weren't going to constantly go, yes, sir. Hopefully there won't be a copyright strike. We'll see. There might be. We'll deal with that. It's a good thing. It's a good tune to have as my ringtone. Yeah, I see what Catherine's up to. Keep Britain busy with France so Russia can move closer to India and warm water ports. Oh, don't worry, I've been copyright striked because of that before, which is why usually my phone's on silent, which was why I was kind of surprised. I went, oh, I'm sure I put it on silent. Obviously I hadn't. Let's see, Mitchell, someone with common sense, but basically he needed something. And he's forming this league and announcing it all in winter time, in the winter, when the fleets are all sealed in. So, you can guess what happens. The British have already sent one fleet to Denmark to go, excuse me, what the frigate are you doing, in August of 1800. And threatened to bombard them, okay? So again, the British are not doing anything they haven't told the Danish and very plainly signalled the Danish they're going to do. I'm not saying the Danish therefore wrong to act, that's not the case. The Danish are perfectly within their rights to do these things as sovereign powers. But you also have to sort of look at it and go, couldn't you prepare yourselves a little bit more? A little bit more. Actually, there is nothing that you can say about Tsar Paul and be nice about it. I tried. At least Peter built a navy. Honestly, I have more time for Peter. He was, as strange as he was still slightly better than Paul. And that's quite scary when you think about it. That Peter was better than Paul. Now, the British government ordered the assembly of the fleet off Great Yarmouth at Yarmouth Roads. Now, this is kind of an interesting one, because you notice Yarmouth is opposite the Netherlands more. It's more opposite those areas of the world. And the Royal Navy has a tradition of having a hospital at Yarmouth, which is quite a useful thing. They have facilities there, so it's quite a good place to form a fleet up and to form it up and keep it there, which is an important thing to remember. You have to form up the fleet, you have to keep it there. This is going to be a diplomatic posturing tool. So the fleet might be sent, it might not be. But it's being formed up. And it's very usefully there. Now, Earl St. Vincent had sent it, decided to form out under the very experienced, very trusted Hyde Parker, who was a safe pair of hands. Second in command was, of course, Horatio Nelson. Now, again, start thinking about what they'd say, what message the British are sending here. It's the perfect combination of a mailed fist in a velvet glove. Hyde Parker is a lovely guy. Really nice, really affable admiral. He's not going to do anything nasty. He will do everything by the book and methodically. He will do. Nelson, however, is the proverbial cannon storm in the middle of a thunderstorm. It's, oh great, we've got that, and oh, that's added on. Now, the British, when they are looking at this scenario, have to deal with two timelines. One, they have to act before the Baltic Sea thawed and release the Russian fleet from its bases at Kronstadt and Naval, now modern Tallinn, as the resulting combined fleet, and this is why you start to see why the British are worried about the League of Armed Neutrality, would have a force of up to 123 ships at a line. Think about that. Russia's just allied with France, and they're forming a League of Armed Neutrality which has a combined power of up to 123 ships at a line. Would you be worried about that if you were Britain at this point? The trouble is for the Danish is they're going to be first. Secondly, it needed to be done before the French could do anything, i.e. either reinforce, take, or go on a conquering spree again. And that taking over can take many forms, because it could just be a British army, French army turns up in Denmark and basically goes, "Oh, we're here to protect you. We outnumber your troops 3-1, but we're here to protect you." Man Freeman, we're sending Ike and Patton. Exactly. And you have to remember, the Swedish, Danish, and Russian fleets are not bad fleets at this point. So again, the British have reasons for behaving the way they're going to behave. The Danish have reasons for doing what they're doing. Both sides have completely understandable, logical reasons. So it's when people start going, well, they have no grounds. No, both sides have grounds for doing what they're doing. The trouble is, these grounds are not going to lead to anywhere good. Wouldn't it be easy to block any fleet coming from Baltic and the Denmark Straits? Yes, but you'd have to base the fleet in the Denmark Straits to do it. Remember, how are you going to operate, where are you going to operate, and also the fleet that's based in the Denmark Straits to secure the Denmark Straits is the fleet based in Copenhagen, which is which fleet? The Danish fleet. They are literally the fleet sitting in the Denmark Straits. And also, if that fleet is 123 ships of the line, how many ships of the line will the British need to have put there? You need to maintain a fleet as big as the one you're using to blockade the whole of France to secure the Denmark Straits. Minister, worst messes always happen when everyone is doing the right thing for their own people. You can say that again, and twice on Sundays. The British fleet commanders. Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, this particular gentleman. He is a fine officer, as I've said. He goes on. He's a full admiral in the Royal Navy. Full admiral. Now, he was the second son of Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, the 5th Baronet. He'd entered the Royal Navy when he was very young, became a lieutenant in 25th January 1758, having passed most of his early sea service in his father's own ships. In December 1762, he was promoted to command Manila, from which on 18th July 1763 he was posted to Baleine. In 1766 onward, he served in the West Indies and North American waters, distinguished himself in breaking the defences of North River and New York in 1776 as captain of HMS Phoenix. It was this particular event which earned him his knighthood in 1779. In 1778, he was engaged in the Savannah expedition, and in 1780, he was wrecked on the hostile Cuban coast. He managed to get his men home and safe. He became Commander-in-Chief of the Leeward Island Station in 1779. No, 1789. And he was with his father at the Battle of Dogger Bank, and with Richard Howe in 2 actions in the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, in 1793, he made flag rank officially, and the same day as war was declared against the new French Republic. As a Rear Admiral, he served under Hood at Toulon and in Corsica. He was promoted to Vice Admiral in July 1794 and took part under then Lord Hotham in the fleet actions of the 13th of March 1795 and 13th of July 1795. From 1796 to 1800, he was in command at the Jamaica Station and conducted various operations in the West Indies very successfully, including the tracking down and execution of a number of crewmen involved in mutiny aboard HMS Hermione in 1797. In 1801, he was put in command of the Baltic Fleet. Now, you have to remember the mission he is charged with. He is not sent out to destroy the Danish, Swedish and Russian fleets. He is sent out to break up the League of Neutrality. Britain does not want to make enemies of Denmark and Sweden. Why? Because they like to trade with them. It's very profitable. However, should they be made enemies of, they have him. Nuclear before 472. Could a Kiel Canal be built made on a 100 tech base with an 8? Theoretically. You just, as Abzowski says, you just need a lot of workforce. Now, Nelson, well, Nelson is a slightly different character. We go through his life, is just massive. But there is a reason he has not been given command. And well, that reason is that after the Battle of the Nile, he had got involved in a lot of political fun things, and including returning to England after sort of refusing orders to return to get England. Nelson, on his way back, left Malta and conveyed Queen Maria Carolina and her suite to Leghorn. Upon his arrival, he shifted his flag to HMS Alexander. Disobeyed Lord Keith's, his commander's orders again. He'd done that a few times. So Keith actually travelled to Leghorn in person. An explanation. Refusing to be moved by the Queen's pleas to allow to be conveyed in a British ship. At which point, Nelson struck his flag and bowed to Lady Hamilton's requests to return to England over land. This all created an issue. Okay, Nelson hadn't respected the chain of command. And as successful and as capable as he had been, he had now publicly broken up with his wife in favour of another man's wife. And well, disobeyed a senior, very connected senior naval officer. Not for reasons of securing victory. Still, Jervis kind of trusted him to be a fighting admiral. He just didn't trust him with political command. And it's almost interesting to see that how Jervis approaches framing things. When he arrived in England, Lord Jervis, i.e. St. Vincent, makes him second in command of the Channel Fleet under himself. He's promoted to Vice Admiral of Blue in 1801. He's granted the freedom of the city of Plymouth in January. And in 29th of January 1801, Lady Emma Hamilton, of course, gave birth to their daughter Horatia. He then has to move his flag from the HMS Saint Joseph to the HMS St. George because he's going to be dispatched by Joseph And that's from a 114-gun first-rate ship, the San Josef, to the St. George, which is a 98-gun second-rate. Again, the British are sending a fleet to the to deal with the Danes. They're not sending as many first-rates. They're going to be second-rates and mostly third-rates to take part in the Baltic. Nelson joins Hyde Parker's fleet at Yarmouth. And some issues do begin there. It's one of the interesting things. We can go back to this. There were a lot of issues with getting the fleet out of Yarmouth. At one point, Nelson basically sends a discreet messenger to Jervis to go, I don't think we're ever going to leave. Hyde Parker's brought his new wife along, and he's spending most of his time, and this is rich coming from Nelson, come on, this is a guy who has literally disobeyed orders of his commander-in-chief of where to be because of his mistress. And he's now complaining because his senior officer, because of his wife, is not rushing to sea because he wants to make sure there are plenty of provisions for her aboard ship. I'm avoiding the chat now. I'm just avoiding the chat. I've just seen someone has written, oh my, OMG little cousins from Bijon. I just don't want to read what's the rest in the chat. So, let's consider, in contrast, the Danish fleet commanders. These, remember, are their leaders they chose with full knowledge that turning down British demands would lead to a naval war. You know, the British have this sort of rather large pool of officers to choose from. And let's be honest, I'm not sure if even Nelson was Jervis's first choice. I'm fairly sure if the other Collingwood brother had still been alive, and I think he's dead by this point, or he's very badly ill, it could well have been him, rather than Nelson sent as second-in-command to Hyde Parker. Now, Johann Alfred Fischer. Fischer was born in Copenhagen in 1747. He was the son of a vice admiral, and he followed his father into his naval career. Now, his rise through the ranks was also set back by romantic entanglements. He was found, when he was supposed to be on guard duty, to instead be dallying with a lady of negotiable virtue. Again, I've got little cousins watching. I'm trying to think of a phrase I can use here which isn't going to get me killed. Unfortunately for him, this particular lady accused him of violent assault, as well as that. Her charges were believed by the military court. Fischer who had by that point had been a lieutenant, was punished and had demoted back to being only able to serve as a common sailor for a period of a year as a result of this. By 1784, he managed to rebuild his reputation enough. He was captain, and he's dispatched to the West Indies as commander of the Bornholm. It was during this 3-year mission that he actually met Nelson. He met Nelson, who was a captain aboard HMS Boreas at the time. And by 1801, he'd risen to the rank of Commodore. And he was appointed to lead the naval defence of Copenhagen. Unfortunately, his flagship, the Denborg, caught fire early in the battle, and Fisher was forced to transfer command, first to a different ship, and then when that ship was also crippled, to a shore battery. Which meant he had very little control over the situation, and this is Fisher. There are many reasons given for the failure to command and control this battle. The sheer power of the British, the firepower of the British, all these things, they're all wonderful reasons to give, but honestly, once you look at Copenhagen and you try attacking it, you then sit there and think, how in the frigging did the British actually do this? Actually, if you want to, this is the thing. Open up another tab, go and have a look at Google Maps. Have a look at Copenhagen. And think, how do you attack that in the age of sail? How in the name of all things holy is there not some sort of very strong defence put here? Now, please note, during the battle, Fisher is wounded in combat and becomes revered as a national hero for his bravery. Nelson, of course, famously pronounces the battle was the fiercest he'd ever been fought. Which again makes sense when you consider the British are not there to try and start a war with the Danish. They're there to stop them getting into a war with the League of Armed Neutrality siding with the French. They're there to break up the League. So they will say whatever they can after the battle is over. After the battle is over, they've won and it's done. They will say whatever they need to say. He ends up becoming a vice admiral and dies in 1829. Now, I would say he tries his best with the issues he's given, but he has to deal with this person called the Crown Prince. And Crown Prince Frederick, well, okay, I will say he's not as bad as Tsar Paul I. But I will say this. If I had to pick between having a conversation with this wall to my left or Frederick, I'd pick the wall. It would be better, it would have a better response rate. It would provide me with definitely far more knowledgeable answers than Frederick. And please note, do not get me started on the Georges, because I'm even ruder about them. But Frederick has a very fixed idea of what the world should be. And that's a lovely thing to have. It's wonderful to have a view of what the world should be. We should all dream about what the world should be at times. However, when you're in charge of leading a nation and you're going to war, you also need to have a knowledge of what the world is. Crown Prince means you're the heir, okay? The king is in charge, the Crown Prince is the heir, but when the king's even less adept, you are the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince tends to start running things. And the trouble is, the king was indulgent and believed his son was smart. As bad as Paul I is a low bar to hit, it is a very low bar to get. So basically, Crown Prince means you're the heir. If you've been technical about it, Prince Charles could have been termed the Crown Prince because we had Prince William and Prince Harry and all the other princes as well, the royal family, because of the Queen. Which technically is you have to be a grandchild of the monarch to be a prince or princess. So if you are great-grandchild, sorry, you don't get that title automatically. As a rule, you tend to get that title if you follow the line of succession. For example, if you go down the line of succession, so if your grandfather is the crown prince, if your father will be your grandfather's crown prince when they become king, you will therefore also be made a prince. But again, it's a fun thing. I think Copenhagen is exposed to open water on both sides. Yes, so you'd think you'd have decent batteries. And Prince of Wales kind of fills in for the title British royal. Yes. Basically, the British use, instead of the phrase Crown Prince as a rule, we use the title Prince of Wales. It works. So, then we have the other luminary. Steven Anderson Bill. Now, how do I put this politely? Okay, so in the War of 1812, we all know the US Navy is forced by their government and especially their president to try a gunboat strategy, right? So, here's the thing. This gunboat strategy doesn't come from nowhere. Believe it or not, there was another set of powers pursuing a gunboat strategy because they thought it was the sensible, logical answer. And this guy... I can't believe I'm talking about him. This guy is the person who comes up with the idea of gunboats as a strategy to try and beat the British. The agenda, which is why Archie and Lilibet are now Prince and Princess, because the Queen died and their grandchildren are king now, not racism. Yeah, it's the weird. But you see, it's weird because if you don't know that bit of protocol, and you don't know that rule, that can look very unfair because William's kids were prince and princesses automatically, and Harry's weren't. So that people are going, why? Why not? And you can understand people's argument of why not, and you can just go, well, they're following the rules. You can ask them who set those rules, and basically you have to go, well, it goes back to basically King George the Fourth, who sort of standardised on those rules. Okay, but it's an interesting time when you start these rules. So, great-grandfather Junicole, there's something definitely there. Anyway. Now. In 1760, he was... let's start off with him. His father was Rear Admiral Daniel Ernst Bill. He became a cadet at the age of 11, despite being described as being of poor physique. And we'll get to that. In 1765, he was aboard the frigate Hividi Uns when storms and contrary winds held the ship in the Baltics for so long there was feared the ship would founder. Prayers were sent to churches around the land for the ship's safety, and it survived. As one of the most able cadets of his year, he was promoted to junior lieutenant in the 16th of March 1768, and then, again in 1783, in the ship of Norse Lavosk, serving in 1768 and then again in 1773 in the ship of the line Norsk Love under his father's command. He was promoted senior lieutenant in 1773. In 1775 he had an independent armed command in a merchant ship, the Mercurius, which was charged with preventing smuggling to enforce control measures against an outbreak of cattle plague in Schleswig-Holstein, or Rinderpest. Then he was sent to the Danish West Indies for 2 years, in 1777, when he becomes friends with the Governor-General, Peter Clausen, and Ernst Ulstorff and Pete Oxen, two future governors. When he returns to Denmark, he's made second in command of the frigate Bornholm, which returned to the Dutch West Indies. Now, as the ship escorted a convoy to Guadeloupe, they encountered three British privateers, and all the merchant vessels Bill was escorting were captured. This upset him for a long time, and despite a court-martial judging him not to be responsible for the loss, he was very upset that he lost these ships. Which speaks well of him, but also speaks of perhaps a bit of a silliness going on if he honestly thinks that he alone should have beaten 3 ships off. He was promoted to commander in October 1781 and was sent on a trading voyage in the Dutch East Indiaman Copenhagen, which was considered one of the poorest sailing ships the company owned. But he managed to return successfully, after suffering many fatalities in his crew. Scurvy broken out on the voyage out, and not one the seaman was fit for duty by the time he reached Cape Town. Billy managed to break an arm, or Bill managed to break an arm, which wasn't set properly and gave him problems for the rest of his life. If you look at that arm, you can see there is one which has a bit of a tourniquet thing around it. He arrived in Bengal and sent his second officer home in disgrace for embezzlement. How you managed to embezzle a ship at sea, I'm not sure, but it takes great skill and probably no amount of stupidity to do so, because you're in a confined space where people can quickly talk and find out what's going on. Oh, there is a fly in here. Must have come in the open window. I could hear something buzzing around above me. I will close the window for starters. Hello. Now, where do we have... Yes. Sorry, Belfast, I do like you, but I do need to kill this fly, because it's going to bug the life out of me otherwise. Now, where's it gone? Clarke versus the Fly. Who will win? Probably the Fly. Not on that side. Not on that side. Where's it sat down? It's gone and sat down somewhere. So it's up that way. Yeah, I can't get it now. Yeah, well. I will have to get it after this is over. We can hear it too. That's good. Wasn't just me then. Flies have no rights, Fushi. So, after he got back, he was in poor health. But, he managed to get better, and at age 38, he's promoted to captain in 1789. He became flag captain to Admiral von Schindel in Den Pratig. Later, he commanded Hafruven and other ships. As head of cadet training and the frigate Frederikshavn in 1795, he earned his students' undying loyalty by allowing them to eat all they wanted each day. In a test set in 1796, racing the old Kronborg against newly built Najden, Bill's Kronborg was always the victor. Then he was made flag captain to Vice Admiral Cass. Then he goes off and serves in the Mediterranean for a bit. And in 1801, he is, well, how do I put this? He is in command of the Denmark, the Trachona, the frigates Iris, Brig, Sarpen, and Nerven, and contingent of gunboats, none of which saw real action that day because he was positioned on the northern side and the battle was raging at the southern end. Oh, what do you know? It's come back this end now. It was hidden above the books when I had a light on. But it's come back this end now. Literally above my head. Oh, yeah. Almost missed it, Belfast. You did. Missed it. Well, that was probably my aim, though. Oh, nope. Think I'm gonna miss it. Oh well. Missed again. Saw me coming. Dang it. 6-1 on the Fly. Yeah, you're all giving odds on the Fly. That's good. The Fly. If you were betting on the Fly, you won. Now, the Danish fleet. Well, it's a rather interesting force. However, it's been rather interestingly played around with because they have some two-deckers which have been cut down in size. Originally secondary gun suits cut down in size. Lots of ships which have been cut down in size. Dunbrog, which is their flagship, which is 64 guns. And, you know, they are having an interesting life in terms of their organisation. And honestly, the whole thing, the Danish fleet is smaller. Please note, the Danish fleet is not really as capable as they could have been. But also, so, this is my big problem with the whole scenario at Copenhagen. Sorry, distracted by the fly. My other problems with Copenhagen is that the British fleet is coming. They know it's coming. It visited them in August the previous year. They know, therefore, it is coming. And they haven't prepared for it. They take the political decisions which mean it's going to be there. It's going to come along. And this is a very active fly. But they don't prepare for it. They know it's coming, but they don't prepare for it. It is absurd. If you know something's coming, if you know... Got it. Sorry, Belfast. If you know something's coming, prepare for it. That's all we ask, really. It just makes sense. Sorry, there's something else dangling up here. It's gone now. Fly down. Oh, good Lord, no. I have to say, I am quite... Because I don't want spiders and things getting into the books, I am very, very... Flies get in here, they are taken out. I need a salt gun for the fly. It's a real thing. Shoot salt. That sounds cool. Now, Danes are outgunned and outnumbered, and they know that it's very... So why bother, no matter what? Well, that's the thing. There are many examples in history of outgunned, outnumbered foes winning battles. It's called preparations. If you know you're going to be doing a course of action where you're going to end up challenging the British to a fight, then prepare for it. For starters, and this is going to sound terrible, pick a more senior officer than a commodore to be in charge of it. This is your capital. This is a very important place you are running. And you are having to protect. Actually look after it! Actually think, you know what? This is somewhere I need to defend. This is somewhere I need to protect. Start actually protecting it. They had 74 gunships, etc. All sorts of ships which were actually not used in the battle. And I would say also, the first thing is, if you're commanding a fleet and you're not going to be commanding it from, it sounds strange, having a commodore aboard a ship's great. But again, if you're commanding the defense of a city, surely the Admiral should have been sitting in a land battery from the beginning anyway, because that position won't get taken out. And they can probably position them in a land battery, which is going to have a better view of whatever's going on than the ships. So far, I don't have too many flies, but I am considering this year getting one of those blue things that you stick up on the wall and that just goes zip, zip, zip when the flies go nearby. Hello, George Newman. Then we have the British fleet. And the British fleet is not exactly massive again. You've got Nelson's squadron, which is sent in to do the work and does fights the actual battle. So London, St. George, Warrior, Defence, Saturn, Ramillies, Reasonable, and Veteran all sit out. So that's Parker's reserve. The ships which go in are Polymathus, a 64, Isis, a 50, Edgar, a 74, Ardent, a 64, Glatton. Something with either 54 or 56 guns, we're not quite sure which. Under Captain William Bligh. Elephant. HMS Elephant, 74. Flag of Vice Admiral Lord Nelson with Captain Thomas Foley in charge. Ganges, 74. Monarch, 74. Captain James Robert Moss will be killed in battle, and thereafter Lieutenant John Yelland, Senior Lieutenant, will take charge. HMS Defiance, 74. Russell, 74. Bellona, 74. Agamemnon, 64. And then we look at these dead. Desiree, 36. Amazon, 38. Blanche, 36. Alcmene, 32. Jamaica, 24. Arrow, a ship sloop, probably about 18 guns. Dart, ship sloop, probably about 16 guns. Cruiser, brig sloop, 16 guns. Harpy, brig sloop, 16 guns. Discovery, a bomb ship. Bomb ships carry huge mortars. They don't actually carry many cannon. And their job is to get close and use their mortars to fire into the town and fire over defences and hit batteries. So you've got Discovery, Explosion, Heckler, Sulphur, Terror, Volcano, Zebra. All these bomb ships. And then you've got fire ships, Otter, Zephyr, which are exactly what you think they are. So, the point is, the British are not exactly sending a massive fleet. If we consider the ones that are actually going to fight a battle, there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 ships in a line. And theoretically, if they've been fighting mobile battle, the Danish could have matched it with, well, they have 4 ships of the line: Elefantin, Mars, Denmark, and Trachona. They have another few sitting up in the primary division. So they have about 8. Plus they have a whole load of batteries, one of which has 68 guns alone. Now, admittedly, the Elefantin was decommissioned in 1801 and used as a block ship and powder store, captured by the British at the Battle of Copenhagen in 1807. But, you know, the thing is, they've got these ships there. If you've got old ships, why not sink them to block the easy routes? The point is, the British are not sending a massive fleet. The British are sending a capable force. But they're not sending a massive fleet. And this is another reason for the British to attack at this point, because, again, the British are fighting this battle with 12 ships of the line and a further 8 held in reserve. So, let's put it this way. Think of the force you can fight with 20 ships of the line versus the forces you can fight. You have the need to fight 123 ships of the line. This is basically a seventh of the force the British would require. And that's before you start coming up with ideas of maintaining a blockade on Denmark Straits against such a force. So we come to the actual Battle of Copenhagen. Now, the instructions Parker had were to frustrate the League by force if necessary. But they didn't want a war, they wanted the League to break up. Now, Nelson originally wanted to ignore Denmark and Sweden, believing both to be reluctant partners in the alliance, and instead sail straight into the Baltic to fight the Russians. Parker wouldn't do this. Parker said, look, no, we're going to work our way from the outside in. I am not going in to attack the Russians only to find the French have somehow secured the Danish fleet behind my back. The Danes had been promised support from Karlskrona in Sweden, but due to adverse winds and the fact the Swedish really didn't want to fight the British, they didn't arrive. And the Russians had at best minimal naval forces, so could also not assist. There was literally no one who could come and help them. The Russians were still frozen in. The Danish felt they had prepared themselves well because they had moored their ships, which were their fleet, which they hadn't fitted for sea, but instead basically moored everything along the shore as a line of floating batteries off the eastern coast of the island of Amager, in front of the King's Channel. The northern end of the line terminated at the Trecana forts, the Three Crowns forts, which was armed with 68 guns. North of that fort, in the entrance to the Copenhagen harbour itself, were 2 ships of the line, a large frigate and 2 brigs, all rigged for sea, and 2 more hulks. Batteries covered the water between the Danish line and the shore, and further out to sea, on a large shoal, the middle ground, it had been so prepared as to constrict the channel. The British had no reliable charts or pilots for the port officially. So, Captain Thomas Hardy managed to spend most of the night of the 31st of March taking soundings in the channel up to the Danish line. British was still not able to locate the deepest part of the channel properly, and so managed to keep too far to the seaward, which actually also spoiled some of the Danish defences, because the Danish had been prepared on the British attacking perfectly, and they forgot the British don't have the information to attack perfectly, so they're probably going to be off-centre. Now, how did they line up the fleets? Well, Parker, as said, gave Nelson 12 ships a line with the shallowest drafts. Or rather, the theoretical shallowest drafts. There is a debate over a couple of them. Parker himself stayed to the northeast of the battle with the heavier ships, primarily screening Nelson from possible external influence and moving towards Copenhagen to engage northern defences, and also to try and distract them, because making them try to believe that the attack wouldn't come unless the Admiral himself led it. But of course, again, if anyone understands, there's Nelson there. Parker is not there to fight the battle. Parker is there to decide when to deploy Nelson. The moment he decides it's okay, unslip the chain, let loose the dog of war. Literally, Parker knows he's there as Nelson's keeper. He also knows he's there to try and not make a war, but to stop one. Nelson, of course, transfers his command from HMS St. George to HMS Elephant. And on the 30th of March, Nelson and Rear Admiral Thomas Graves, who'd be his second in command, accompanied by Captain Dommett and Lieutenant Colonel William Stewart, who was commanding officer of the troops, sailed in the Lark, the hired lugger, to reconnoitre the Danish defences at Copenhagen. They did feel the defences were strong, but there are issues you can already see with them, and we've been discussing this. In that the Battle of the Nile has already happened. Okay? The Battle of the Nile had happened about 3 years previously, we can argue. 2 to 3 years previously, August 1798. After checking exact dates. At that point, how are you really going to say, look, what we'll do is we will line our ships up for the enemy to come in? Now, fixed batteries had a significant advantage over shipborne cannon owing to their greater stability and larger guns. Those were a threat. And if there'd been more of those, and they'd been better supplied, there would have been big problems. And Danes, it was felt, could reinforce their ships during the battle, although in practice, actually doing this seemed to be very difficult, if not nigh on impossible for the Danes with some ships. However, the ships collected were mostly small and outgunned if engaged by Nelson's force. And frankly, Nelson was looking at them going, where are their third rates? Where are their ships? You know, they've got a couple of third rates. Where are their first rates, their second rates? Where are their big ships? And this is the trouble for Denmark. They don't have them. They don't have the industry or infrastructure to have them. Now, here is the interesting thing. That isn't necessarily a problem for Denmark. Having decent third rates would be fine, would be enough for this job. But they've managed to get themselves into a scenario where they know they can't win, and they were depending on others coming to assist them, and they couldn't come. And even if they had been there to assist them, I honestly don't think the arrival of the Swedish ships that would likely have been available would have changed the outcome of this battle. Because, let's say the Swedish ships turn up. Well, the Danish ships are no longer rigged to go to sea. So what's the Royal Navy going to do? They're going to beat up the Swedish ships at sea, and then they're going to deal with the Danish ships. Because they don't need to fight them together. They can fight them separately. The Danish, the very specific position. If the Danish had wanted to cause the British real trouble, they'd had their fleet all rigged for sea, and the moment it was fine to sail, they would have left Copenhagen. They'd have sailed to where they can meet up with the Swedish fleet, and they'd have formed a combined fleet together, and that would have forced the Swedes' hands. Nelson's plan is simple. The British ships were to approach from the weaker southern end of the Danish defences. Yeah, that's the other problem. The Danish concentrated all their defences on the northern end, presuming the British were just going to come in and be stupid. And the British actually managed to get their way round to the southern end and go, hello, we're coming up from here. Now, there's also something quite clever about his plan. Basically, as the foremost ship would come alongside a Danish ship, instead of passing that ship, that ship would anchor and engage the Danish ship, and then the next ship, the line would carry on past it, and then engage and anchor, and then engage the next ship. So the line would constantly be moving forward, but the ships would anchor to engage their opponents. A sort of creeping fleet, if you want. They also decided that the frigates, HMS Desiree, together with the smaller of the gun brigs, would rake the Danish line from the south. The remainder of the frigates, under Edward Rio of HMS Amazon, would attack from the northern end line. Troops would land and assault the Trecrona fortress once the fleet had subdued the Danish line of ships. And bomb vessels would sit outside the British line and bombard the Danes by firing over it. The plan was that should the British be unable to subdue the stronger northern defences, the destruction of southern ships would be enough to allow the bomb vessels to approach within range of the city and force negotiations to prevent the bombardment of the city. Now, on the 2nd of April, with a southerly wind, Nelson carefully approached the channel. I would say almost gingerly approached the channel. Agamemnon ran aground before entering the channel and therefore took no part in the battle, much to her annoyance. Russell and Bellona ran aground on the middle ground, which restricted their role in the battle to basically firing at whatever they could get in range. And thus this meant that the northern end was weakened, and the three vessels hurried changes were made in line. But again, It's gone down to now, the Royal Navy's gone from having 12 ships of the line to go into the fight to having 9. Okay? It's now 9 versus theoretically 8. Theoretically, could have been 8 ships of the line. Danish batteries started firing at 10:05 am. Within about the first 30 minutes, the first half of the British fleet was engaged. And all ships were engaged, that could be engaged, were by 11:30 am. As you can guess from policy of the ships going up, anchoring opposite their opponents and engaging, there is very little manoeuvring once you're engaged. The British ships anchored by the stern, about a cable distance from the line of British ships, of Danish ships and batteries. This is relatively long range, and the two exchange broadsides until the ship ceased firing. Now, the British hadn't spotted the low-lying floating batteries, and there was significant engagement. Trust me, the Danes are no cowards. They fight hard. But the northern Danish ships, which were rigged and manned and crewed to actually move, did not enter the battle and remained on station reserve units, even though the wind direction forced Parker's squadron to approach only slowly. So basically, the ones which were which they could have sailed out and could have theoretically, okay, yes, there is a southerly wind. So theoretically, the ships on the northern end could have come out and sailed south down the line, especially considering they knew where the channel was, far better than the British did, and could have doubled up the British, but they didn't. Yes, Trekona is a reference to the Free Crown, to the Danish, Norwegian, Swedish Kalmar Alliance. At 1:30 p.m, Parker makes a signal of recall. Now, this is the famous signal. And he does this because, as he says to his own flag captain, I will make the signal of recall for Nelson's sake. If he's in condition to continue the action, he will disregard it. If he is not, it will be an excuse for his retreat, and no blame can be imputed to him. Because under the Articles of War, all ranks are required to do their utmost against the enemy in battle. So therefore, retreat is not an option, theoretically, under the Articles of War in the Royal Navy. So it's quite important when you can see, and he could see, the Agamemnon, the Bellona and the Russell flying signals of distress and inability to proceed because of their conditions, and you can see them on this map. If you look, you can see where they end up. You can see the Bellona, you can see the Russell, and you can see the Agamemnon. Now, that's where they end up. He can see that. He can't see in the smoke what's going on. But he gives Nelson the option. And Nelson, of course, turns to his flag captain, reportedly, and says, you know, Foley, I only have one eye. I have the right to be blind sometimes. I really do not see the signal. Admiral Graves, his second in command, repeated the signal, but in a place which was invisible to most other ships, whilst keeping Nelson's close action signal at his masthead. So most captains were going, what the frigate is that Graves doing? He's flying close action from the top and he's offering us retreat at the bottom. And carry on. unfortunately, Ryu, who, if I remember correctly, is in charge of HMS Amazon, only Ryu withdraws his forces, which were attacking the Tracrona fortress, which exposed him to heavy fire, which resulted in his own death and the deaths of several crew members aboard Amazon. So, yeah, basically, Ryu managed to get himself, sadly, and hit quite a lot of officers and personnel killed by withdrawing, when he was actually safe for attacking. Why not send a couple of ships of the reserve as reinforcements? Honestly, because they wouldn't make it in time, and he was keeping his squadron back in case of enemy reinforcements coming up. At about 1:30, things start to swing in favour of the British. Because this is the problem. You see, the Danish have put this fleet in its position, and it can all look nice and strong, but they haven't done much gunnery practice, they haven't done much targeting practice, and the superior gunnery is usually the phrase used to describe, but actually it's the rate of fire and the accuracy of fire starts to take an effect. The guns at a dozen southernmost Danish ships started to fall silent between about 1:30 and 2 p.m. Most of the British line had fallen silent by 2 p.m. and the cessation of firing left the way open for British bomb vessels to approach Copenhagen. And the problem, the other problem going on is that the reinforcements for the ships were being brought from the shore batteries. Okay. Now, this is people are going to go, well, that's an obvious place to recruit them from, to bring them from. Yes, but they're actually bringing the personnel from the shore batteries to support the ship, to take over, to resupply the ships. Which means the shore batteries are running out of personnel and they can't fire as well. Can we all consider that? To keep the ships firing, you're taking people from the shore batteries, who were also firing, putting them in a boat, which they can't fire from, to transfer them to a ship which they will then fire from if they make it. Can we all see the issue with this idea? With this absolutely wonderful idea which some bright spark has come up with? Or can we think, hang on, it might be more sensible to have the crews of the shore batteries be separate personnel from those people who are sent to reinforce the ships? It might be sensible. Just a small possibility. At this point, Nyborg tried to leave line with Agaricus in tow, but both sank. And then the frigate Heldren successfully withdrew. And then Commodore Oert Fisher, who had moved from the Danborg at 11:30 am, and Holston, when the Indrafrosten, which was immediately north of the Holstein, struck its colours at 2:30 p.m. He had moved onto the Tracrona fortress. And got a senior captain, Captain Schrodeshi, ferried over to take command of the Indrafrosten, and he took command of the ship. That's all fine. Now, one of the things that then comes after this, and if the ship they're going to is still capable of action by the time when they arrive. Yeah, well, this also caused an interesting thing, because several Danish ships fired on British boats sent out to them after their officers signalled their surrender. Basically, because the officers might have surrendered, but the Danish sailors were going, no, we will fight on. Good for them. But Nelson decided that he must either send on shore and stop this irregular proceeding, or send in our fire ships and burn them. And he wrote a note to the Danes. He sent Captain Sir Frederick Tessinger, Danish-speaking officer, under the flag of truce to Crown Prince Frederick. He'd been watching the battle from the ramparts of the citadel. The note read thusly: To the brothers of Englishmen, the Danes. Lord Nelson has directions to spare Denmark when she is no longer resisting. But if firing is continued on the part of Denmark, Lord Nelson will be obliged to set on fire the floating batteries he has taken, without having the power of saving the brave Danes who have defended them. At this point, Frederick sent his adjutant general, Hans Lindholm, and they decide to send a note back to Nelson a note back to Nelson. If your guns are not better pointed than your pens, then you will make little impression on Copenhagen. Nelson therefore wrote this: Nelson's object in sending the flag of truce was humanity. He therefore consents the hostilities shall... There's a full larger note on that, but it included that line. He therefore consents the hostilities shall cease, and that the wounded Danes may be taken on shore. Lord Nelson will take his prisoners out of the vessels, and burn and carry off his prizes he shall see fit. Lord Nelson, with humble duty to his Royal Highness, the Prince of Denmark, will consider this the greatest victory he has ever gained, if it may be the cause of a happy reconciliation union between his own most gracious sovereign and his Majesty the King of Denmark. He then sent, of course, Hans Lindholm, the adjutant, to Parker aboard HMS London, and followed him there at 4 p.m. At which point a 24-hour ceasefire is agreed. Here's what's really the worst thing. Fighting had ceased at 4:30 p.m. when the Danbrog exploded, killing 250 men. By the afternoon, 3 more of the badly damaged British ships, including Elephant, had run aground. The Danish-Norwegian ships were being crewed by volunteers, many having little or no naval experience, and therefore it is uncertain as to the exact losses the Danish-Norwegian actually occurred, because we don't actually have records. Estimates vary between 1,135 and 2,215 captured, killed, or wounded. Ulfert Fischer's official report estimated the Danish-Norwegian casualties between 1,600 and 1,800 captured, killed, or wounded. According to the official returns and dispatches by Nelson and forwarded by Parker to Embassy, British casualties were 963 killed and wounded. Of the Danish vessels engaged in battle, 2 had sunk, 1 exploded, the Danbrog, and 12 been captured. The British decided not to spare men for manning prizes, as they suspected further battles were to come, so they burned 11 of the captured ships, and only 1, the Holstein, was sailed to England, with the wounded under the surgeon William Ferguson, and actually entered service with the Royal Navy. It was probably the best of the options. Now, after the 1801 battle, Nelson is landed to open negotiations. He has a 2-hour meeting with the Crown Prince, who spoke English. Nelson was able to secure an indefinite armistice, He then tried to convince Fisher and the Prince of to protect British protection against the Russians. Negotiations continued by letter, and on the 8th of April, Nelson returned in person with a formal agreement. There is one problem, as far as the Danish are concerned, and that was a 16-week armistice to allow action against the Russians by the British. Now, unfortunately, at this point, someone is a bit silly. Because, according to the reports of Colonel Stewart, at one point during the negotiations, one of the Danes turned to another and said in French that this agreement might lead to a renewal of hostilities. Nelson, who spoke pretty darn good French, said, "Renew hostilities? Tell him that we are ready in a moment, ready to bombard this very night." He told that to, of course, to his interpreter, but of course he said it in very loud English, which meant the king, the crown prince, Frederick, heard and understood what was going on. And Frederick had a, what can only be described as a come to Nelson moment, in that he'd realised that, in the nicest way, it isn't good to get caught between a rock and a hard place. Hurried apologies are issued. The agreement is reached and signed the next day, and the armistice was reduced to 14 weeks. But during it, armed neutrality would be suspended, and the British were to have free access to Copenhagen. Danish prisoners were paroled. Now, the Danes did actually find out during these negotiations, but the British didn't, that Tsar Paul had been assassinated. This resulted in the dissolution of legal armed neutrality anyway, which allowed the Danes to accept British terms with complete freedom. And so the final peace agreement was signed on the 23rd of October 1801. Now, then we have what comes afterwards. Oh, this is the Holstein. She's a fully rigged ship. She's fairly decent. She has a complement of roughly 373 to 470 crew, with 100 soldiers aboard in Danish service. In British service, 491 sailors and marines. Armament as a Danish vessel is as a 60-gun ship. As a British vessel, it's a 66-gun ship. Different Seneca era, that's the difference between Ultimate Admiral Age of Sail and historical accuracy. They didn't have that many ships which the British judged were useful. The British looked and went, yeah, no. You know, look at this ship. It's a 66-gun ship in the British service. How useful is that for the British? It's a lower-end third rate. Yeah, they'll use it. But what will they use it for? In British service, well, she's repaired at the cost of £22,000. She's renamed Nassau. And she's put under the command of Captain Rumble Campbell. In 1806, she's in company with Majestic, Agincourt, Dictator, Orpheus. Dictator's a 64-gun, Agincourt is a 64-gun, Majestic is a 74-gun, Orpheus is a 32-gun frigate, and Sparrow is another 32-gun frigate. And the cutter Florence captured the Prussian galleot Georges Bartels. 5 days later after that, Nassau captured the Viceroy. Between May and June 1807, she escorted a convoy to Madeira. She took part in the Battle of Zealand Point, where it was Nassau and the 64-gun Stately that destroyed the last Danish ship of the line, the HDMS Prince Christian Friedrich, commanded by Captain Carl Wilhelm Jessen in the Battle of Zealand Point. This, of course, is in 1808, after the second Copenhagening in 1807. That's a bit cruel to use the Nassau, which is formerly the Holstein, to do that job, but you know. And in 1809, she was escorting a convoy east in Dominion in the English Channel when she sighted a strange sail. She sent her boats in chase, and after 2 hours they were able to capture the French privateer, the Jean Bart of Saint-Malo. That vessel was armed with 4 guns and a crew of 25 men, under the command of Ensign de Vaisseau Louis Oliver Pilvesy. And that vessel was 5 days out of Ile-de-Bath and had made no captures so far. She's laid up in Chatham in 1809. And in 1810, she's commissioned as a prison ship under the command of Lieutenant William Field. She's commanded by him until she's sold in November 1814. The Dutch, probably better than the Danes. Danes, probably better than the French. Spanish and Danes, probably Spanish have an edge on the Danes. Setting here, it's the adaptation setting. What normally are brigs or sloops can be 144 gun ships line if you do well enough. Fun. Sounds accurate. Now we get into the subsequent events. And this is one of the interesting things, because there are so many events after 1807. Honestly, after the second Copenhagen, the British get up to all sorts of random things. As I said, there's the Battle of Zealand Point, which is, 3 ships of the line and a frigate versus a single ship of the line. Part of the gunboat war. And yeah, that's really... Well, that's just not a successfully a great successful time for anyone. The gunboat war. But anyway, on the 12th of April, Parker sailed to Copenhagen, and on the British approach, the Swedish fleet returned to port. Now, Parker attempts then to also leave the League. He persuades them. He's trying to do it politely. He's trying to do it diplomatically. And he gets thinly veiled, well, orders which are thinly veiled in the thinnest way as a request to sail into the Eastern Baltic and deal the Russians, but instead returned to Copenhagen. When he got back to Copenhagen, he found that news of his lack of vigour had reached London. And they were kind of, how do I put this, infused by the very active approach of Nelson. Or rather, now that the Danish had been knocked out, the Swedes were doing a sort of armed neutrality where they were sitting in port. The only real problem was the Russians, so time to go scare the Russians. That was the British thinking, anyway. It wasn't necessarily the most sensible option, but it was the option they went with. And so on the 5th of May, he's recalled with honour, but ordered to hand his command over to Nelson. Immediately, Nelson goes, I'm sailing eastwards. And, leaving 6 ships of line to cover Karlskrona, where the Swedish are, he arrived at Naval on the 14th of May to find that the ice had melted and the Russian fleet had instead departed for Kronstadt. So instead of heading to support their Danish allies, they had gone to Kronstadt. He also found out negotiations for the ending the armed neutrality had started due to the death of Tsar Paul, and so withdrew his ships on the 17th of May. Basically, a strange sail is they spot something that doesn't look right. So they spot something and they go, that ship doesn't look this. Basically, strange sail is kind of like, how do I put this? Okay, if you ever talk with a police officer and they say the phrase to you, I don't like the optics. I can't put my finger on what's wrong in this scenario I'm looking at, but I don't like it. There is something going on here. There is something fishy. That's similar when you see a strange sail. That ship's behaving very oddly. Go and look. Boats, go look at that ship. So that's really what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the fact that, how to put it, experienced naval officers will sit there and look out and go, is that ship, does it look like it's on the path to any particular port to you? No. Looks like it's hanging around the trade lanes, though. I wonder if it's in distress. Yeah. Send the boats. You take lead, First Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Master, prepare to away boats. Then crack on the sail and we'll go investigate ourselves. Pretty much what happens. It's looking odd. Let's go find out why it's looking odd. The British High Command after this point basically find Nelson useful to use for other things. Now, after the Battle of Copenhagen, he then has leave in England. Gets himself involved in further political trouble by being a character witness in the trial of Colonel Edward Despard. But it was kind of interesting because his exact account was, "We went on the Spanish Main together. We slept many nights together in our clothes upon the ground. We have measured the height of enemy walls together. In all that period of time, no man could have shown more zealous attachment to his sovereign and his country." However, under cross-examination, Nelson was forced to concede that he had lost sight of Despard for the last 20 years. And after the colonel was actually executed, Fanny Nelson did take Catherine Despard, his wife, under her protection. Nelson was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet in 1803, given Victory as his flagship. Promoted to Vice Admiral of the Right while still at sea in April 1804. And that, of course, leads to all the campaign which eventually leads to the Battle of Trafalgar. So just a general gut feeling type thing then. Yeah. It's that you've spent, if you consider when you're dealing with a ship's crew, captain will have probably been at sea for 20 plus years by the time they're in command of a ship. They will have gone to sea as a boy. Most likely between 8 and 9, maybe as young as 6. They will probably be in their early 30s. The first lieutenant will might be in the early 30s, late 20s. Again, 20 odd years. Then there's the master, sailing master, who could well have 30, 40 years of sea experience. And that's your senior 3 people who probably between them have about nearly 100 years of experience. Especially once you start to add in the other lieutenants, you've probably got over 100 years worth of sailing experience sitting there. And the ship experience sitting there in the command structure. If they have a funny feeling over something, that's good. That's a good reason to go and react onto it. And who's going to tell them not to? Who's going to tell any of those people when they have a funny feeling? Let's put it this way. If the ship's captain in that time has a funny feeling, there is no... We have a command to link back to the UK. We can check with them what's going on. No. There's no one. When that ship's there, there's no senior officer for them to talk to. They're on a convoy duty. They're in charge of the convoy. They're protected as they see fit. No one's gonna cross-examine them. If they go out, if the ship turns out to be fine, it's fine. But that's part of the point, because if you do react and it doesn't turn out to be fine, you've dealt with it because it comes to good problems. Victory was considered a fairly decent first rate. She was definitely one of the ones which was looked at properly, looked at with affection, definitely. And in pop culture, the British are strange people who wear powdered wigs and funny coats and tight pants, while the Vikings are ferocious fighters. The Vikings are Danes, so Danes should have won, right? No. Also, in pop culture, if you ever consider, most of the villains played in American movies have British accents. Because we automatically sound more scary. Or occasionally they go with German-speaking English accents. But, you know, when you speak properly as British, and you do speak, you can sound very, very scary. Very scary. You can sound like you have absolutely no qualms about what might happen, should you need to do so. We can all be very pleasant. We can all have a cup of tea, can't we? It'd be far better. Some iron brew? Some water? That's far better to have iron brew, isn't it? In your gullet. Far better to have iron brew in your gullet, isn't it? Rather than anything else. Victory is not really the template of mass production of first rates, but she certainly, she does have some ideas towards them, but no, there is something sometimes put out and going, she's the template. No, first rates were never mass produced in that kind of idea or volume, and in table that, and B, they're kind of like the glorious heritage class cruisers when I talked about them, right? First rates, in that they are just, whilst they're theoretically sometimes classes, and theoretically they are going to be repeats of each other, they are so powerful, so special, and so important that every single one is always going to be a bit of an individual. It's the same with all capital ships. There's always going to be a version of which is a bit of an individual. My cooch, the British are very polite to each other because we're all well aware of what we're capable of when we stop being polite. Virginia Tidewater accents by Marine colonels is scary. I agree with Runon. Which one? Basically, the First Battle of Copenhagen is a good example of everyone managing to do it in just the right way, to do their jobs in just the right way to cause things to go maximally wrong. My area is different from Tangier, which is different from the Hampton Roads and so on. I think Tangier is the closer to colonial times. Stafford. Good evening, Stafford. Having a good day at work. Actually, I have to say, one of my friends has told me that there is an iron brew whiskey being created in Scotland, or has been created. Apparently it's somehow using the original recipe of iron brew and is basically has been turned into whiskey as well. And I have no idea how they've done it or what they've done. As you all know, I don't drink alcohol, so I will never taste it. But there is apparently an iron brew whiskey coming out. Vision, Star Wars is filmed in the UK and Irish, so a lot of the Imperials speak Queen's English, being supporting actors, while the main cast of Rebels are from California. So, any questions? Because that's, broadly speaking, the end. Broadly speaking. I was expecting any more questions through this. I hope you enjoyed it. It's always a fun topic to do. But, yeah, I was expecting slightly more questions. But there again, I can understand... I might have missed the questions. But I can understand why not, because it is one of those scenarios where... And then someone makes a decision and it gets worse. Any scenario where you're talking about international relations and your first words out of your mouth are going to be, this involves an organisation set up by Tsar Paul I, you know things are going to be problematic. Oh no, sorry mate, just got back from the doctor. Aside from cutting the sugar drink, I'm in good health. Did the Danes learn anything from the repeats in 1807? Seems for this repeat in 1807. Not really. As you remember when we discussed in 1807, they really weren't prepared then either. And they should have been. Who's done more preemptive strikes? The UK or Japan? Probably the UK by a few country miles. Because the British have done it. It's been called gunboat diplomacy. There have been whole wars which have been preemptive strikes. There was one war which I think lasted about 14 minutes, which was all technically a preemptive strike. Why are books so expensive these days? Trust me, I was looking at the British fleet operations in the Baltic for this, and I'm looking at the price of it and going, I'm going to stick with the fact that I have 3 chapters of it and not try and buy the book. What is the act of Copenhagen? The act of Copenhagening is, and is a verb, is to catch the enemy fleet in harbour and destroy them in detail. Or attempt to destroy them in detail. Sure, mate. I only have one thought. Use your military engineers to make fortifications. That's what you pay them for. Good lord, man! Good lord. Next you'll be saying you should actually have some form of actual registered reserve formed up so you know who's going out to crew your ships, rather than sending out swarms of volunteers in boats from your batteries. Good lord, man. You suggesting some actual organisation? Thank you, Bijan, for giving the neighbour $2. He's a good neighbour. What was the price of the book? Enough that I was asking whether it was honestly worthwhile spending on it this month. Let's put it this way, this month I have a lot of expenses. I have Mother's Day, and I have expenses coming up in June, which I'm sort of starting to put money aside for, and I need to put money aside for my car. All these things are going to cost lots of money, and all these things require me to actually not spend money. So I have to sort of keep trying to save stuff. Questions? University lecturer, free class, and we can interact. That's a good deal. I guess I got you for £10 a month, but at $1.25 a lecture, your prices cannot be beat. Neither can do. Thank you. DHN went to the Danish War Museum this summer. They were objective in covering both 1801 and 87 expensively, some great models. They really are very good. I have to admit, the vast majority of the Danish people I've met and discussed this, and I have worked with a lot over the years, are very much a case of, yeah, Frederick was not good at grand strategy, is usually the phrase. Frederick was not good at grand strategy. He was good at politics sometimes, but not good at grand strategy. And most people who tend to react otherwise and go, oh, the British were evil, etc., just go read the room. Look at the events which were going on, the wider context, and you soon find out why it happens, and also that the Danish knew it was probably going to happen. They actually made the decision that it was better to have war with Britain than war with Russia and France, and therefore, in the nicest way, this is what happened, war with Britain. So you don't want to buy a hilltop mansion in Kitchener, Ontario? No. But tempting, Glyn. By the way, I think Glyn's house might be for sale. Considering the messages I'm getting, I think he might finally have managed to get that. Some of you have been listening to it. One of his house for sale. So if anyone is looking for a house to buy in Kitchener, Ontario, I think Glyn is currently trying to sell one. Zarus Funk, Anglo-Zanzibar. 38 minutes of shelling and the king surrendered. Technically a preemptive strike. Honestly, if you want the scariest language to listen to someone being nice to you in, and I'm going to preface this by saying I have friends who are, but thank you, Ugly Steve. I'm going to just finish the point before I get to your question. The language which sounds scariest when they're being nice to you is Georgian. Because some of the words they say, which are supposed to be nice words, and can sound really harsh to an English-speaking ear because of the phrase. And it's just, you listen to it and go, they threatening, they're going to take my head. No, they're saying they really like you. And they're sort of going, okay, that just doesn't sound right. I am still going to be on my guard here. That's right, I need a stalking horse better. Ugly Steve, thank you. Thank you very much for the very generous super chat. Honestly, I thought it was $5 and then read that. Thank you, thank you. Good lord. I haven't had one that big in a while. If you captain a ship of Trafalgar, ignore word of side you want. From what land regiment would you draw your boarding party from? Well, if I was British, I'd draw them from the Royal Marines, of course. But I also might draw them from the Prince of Wales's own, because then I might hand up with Captain Sharp, if I can. But leaving that to one side, the Spanish, I would try and get the Irish Guards, because they're a very, very fine regiment in the Spanish history, and they're usually very, very decent soldiers. And if I'm going to go into battle, I want good soldiers with me. French, the whole army's absolutely nucked. So pretty much anything which is the... I want probably Chevaliers, light troops. They're light infantry specialists. They're riflers, if I could. And of course, if I was Imperial and I was picking a land regiment... It's annoying, but... Which regiment would I pick? I'd be tempted by some cash and jungle fighters, actually. But probably... probably the Tempestuous Scions. Actually, no, I'll go for the Cashans. If I'm Imperial fleet in Warhammer 40k. Because, frankly, the Cashan jungle fighters are capable of doing very nasty things in close quarters, and that's basically the whole thing for ship fighting. It's close quarters combat. I'm not used to... This is going to sound terrible, but usually super chats, if they come through, are dollars. So I automatically presume they're dollars, and then I notice they're pounds. Went, what? And then went, it's not $5, it's... Oh, good lord, thank you very much, Ugly Steve. Yeah, if I was the Russians, goodness gracious, who I'd pick. I know who I'd pick if I was... I'd pick the Norse Guard if I was the Byzantine Empire, because they are friggin' good troops. They're really, really good. But honestly, for the Russians... their infantry regiments, they really don't get... their Imperial era infantry regiments do not get the level of training you'd want them for shipboard fighting. Okay, so Imperial, come on, fire reverse Vader's fist. Nah, then I'd probably get Vader, and that's always annoying. I have to deal with Vader as a command structure. That's ignorant friends. So would RMMV Oceanic have been considered a ship that would have required a super heavy escort if it was being used as a troop ship? Oceanic. It would probably be fast enough. It wouldn't be given an escort. So just remember, the liners, some of them were considered, if they were fast enough, they would be not given an escort. They would run solo and run very quickly. They would basically go full speed across the Atlantic. For them to justify having an escort, that means you're going to have a cruiser which is going to wear itself out. Remember, the town-class cruiser that did have to escort a liner across the Atlantic because it was running fast with precious cargo did have to have its turbines rebuilt afterwards, because the Royal Navy orientates its ships around cruising, because that's what they have to do most often, not high speed the entire way across the Atlantic and back. That's a very different turbine layout. And that's a good way to wear out your turbines and boilers. Just on, wouldn't we use Cashans? They're specialised in jungle warfare. You want some high water regiment. But the thing is, Gurkhas are very good as a shipboard regiment. I've worked alongside people who have actually worked with Gurkhas who have worked alongside Royal Marines, and I've worked with the Royal Marines who have worked alongside those Gurkhas, and when they've been helping out and doing things like that. And the Gurkhas are very good at shipboarding. So in my mind, jungle warfare, especially if you consider the ships in Warhammer 40k, and you consider especially what some of the ships, especially some of the Chaos controlled ships are like, they are closer to a jungle than perhaps most ships are. Yeah, nice one. Wouldn't you consider the UK-US airliner race post-World War II as an ensemble tech or numbers race? Tech race. It's about national prestige. It's a tech race. Scholar Gladiatoria has a Greek video on the trench knives and has a lot of great CCUB fighting suggestions from the men who did the most of it. Yeah. Michael Cooch, would troops armed and armoured as Rome Marines be an advantage or disadvantage in Napoleonic combat? Not sure with their... Look, they couldn't use their shields and their armor's gonna be no protection against musket balls. But in terms of once they've got across the deck and they're inside the ship, they could be quite useful. But you can't use your shields to go across that through cannon ports. But you could use them maybe in some of the deck boarding. Basically, yes and no, but I prefer not to. I'd like to take some of the equipment, yes. Some of the equipment I could make use of, but there's a limited amount. And also there's the fact that you all remember that armor always reduces flexibility. Look, 10 years left in the UAD campaign, and have completed British goals. I've wiped out France and Russia, as well as annoyed the Americans by having 20 times their GDP and 4 times their fleet tonnage. Not quite sure how you managed that, but yeah. Minister for boarding Warhammer ships. Can I have a tank regiment? Tempting. I said, where did they do full speed across the Atlantic? Was that a British fish also? How long did they make it in? The whole way through the war. The moment they start being used as troop convoys and troops transports, especially from Canada, but later on with ships from taking personnel from America, there were often the liners were running as fast as they could across the Atlantic. Then they'd offload, refuel, and run straight back to collect more people and come back. And they were doing it as high a speed as they could to get troops over as quickly as they could. So, for various operations throughout the war, they do it. It changes names depending on who's being transported, but throughout the war, they're moving people at high speed. I thought, well, Oceanic was to have a speed of 30 to 32.5 knots. A ship that only a capital ship could have keep up with her at top speed was Hood. I don't believe that later so in nicest way, there are some light cruisers which could theoretically keep up, broadly speaking, with her. But they would be worn out. That's right. I don't believe the latter Comet 4 jetliner was meant to face the stuff to you as well. Yes and no, Knights of Gotron, yes and no. Oh, herd cruisers, not liners or something. Yeah, it's the liners. They're escorting the liners. Occasionally, they get escorted by a cruiser, but they go fast. They do basically, liners do across the Atlantic like the Russians fly in air operations. Okay, when you're dealing with Russians in World War II, and this comes up quite a lot when British and American aircraft are sent out to assist the Russians. Their range of operation changes, and the British and Americans are looking, why are you getting such short ranges out of the aircraft? Because the Russians redline them the entire way in and the entire way out. The Russians do not understand the concept of flying at all at a cruising speed. They do everything at maximum speed. Because that fits their doctrine, and also fits their appreciation of the situation on the Eastern Front. But this changes the way you operate aircraft. It changes a lot of factors in it. And it's the same when you're operating your liners across the Atlantic and doing the runs with them. You're operating at full speed the entire way. And potentially for Oceanic, but not as much as that would necessarily need. I think you are missing that there are lots of facilities which could have potentially built it. And building a one-off liner is far easier than building a class of ships, a class of capital ships, and also the cost differentials are different for what they're prepared to do. So I'm fairly sure Browns could have produced turbines for her, and everyone could have sorted it out if they'd had the money and wanted to do it, and really wanted to do it. Which is always the scenario, if they had the money and wanted to do it, really wanted to do it. The Comet 4 is an interesting aircraft, 96831. It's kind of off topic for our discussion today, but the Comet 4, think of it as... how do I put this? An attempt to go for luxury. Its style, its luxury, its looks are what they're going for. You're thinking of things in terms of the stats and the hardcore. The British are going for the image, and a Comet looks sexy. Royal Mail motor vessel. Who knows what will make it onto Bill Trump's? At the moment, I'm not even sure if our guests are confirmed. I've sent an invite to 3 guests who are hopefully will make it. Hopefully tomorrow morning for recordings, but we'll see. Why is it I keep getting those? Sorry, I have noticed one thing, and this is going to sound terrible. But since the change in leadership on Twitter, I swear I've had more people sending me, well, let's say, pictures of negotiable virtue on Twitter as messages. Melanie, I have tried to invite more than... Look, yes, we have managed to get, out of the many female guests I have invited onto Bill Trump's, only one has ever made it without anything terrible happening. We are always trying to invite more. We do not know what or where the curse has come from, but it has come. Comet was the plane used for Nimrod. Yeah, I do realise those messages are scams and spam bots, but, you know, it's the sheer quantity. I used to get, like, 1 a year. Now I get about 6 a month. I have it out I've reached target male age group that they think now, well, he hasn't changed his Facebook status to in a relationship or anything, so, no. Thank you, Jack Ray. Alright then. So, any more questions? I'm just wondering, did I get Dr. 8 grand over his Telegram number? Are you saying it wasn't him who said I won and asked me to call him on Telegram? Please tell me those messages aren't going through. I haven't spotted any, but if you do spot any of those messages pretending to be me, please do tell me. Thanks, Jack Ray, for the memberships. Have you decided on Patreon bonus yet? No, but I have an idea. I do have an idea. It will be announced in the Battle of Yarman video, what the Patreon bonus will be. And we'll also be doing the vote. Well, the suggestions and then the vote soon. You know, it's fun. But what I should tell you is that soon, at some point, we're going to be making a big announcement. I know I keep saying this, and I keep saying it's going to... Hopefully it's going to be tomorrow. Hopefully. Hopefully we launch everything tomorrow. But it's just making sure everything's right. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone. As I said, I will disappear for a few minutes and then I'll be on the Discord, on the live. Hope you're all well. Hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for watching. And, of course, Long Patrol for this video will be out on Saturday. Where do I find build charts? Simplecast, but we also do come out on iPlayer and all sorts of things. Launch what? We're launching something. That's the first thing. Yeah, it's not just going to be one thing. It's going to be something massive. Well, massive for me. Thank you, Leslie. Andrew Cruz, I think you mentioned before about your family having a history with the Navy. Is there a video where you go through that? I don't think I've done a specific video. I've done a video on some of the ships my dad was involved in. And some of the ships my dad built and was involved with. But I haven't done a video on my family history. Because, honestly, my family history... Once we start talking, it's probably going to get a lot of people tracking me down going, it was your family who did that to my family. Yeah, it was. Look, we were equal opportunities. We would take your ship off you quite happily, no matter who you were. We tended to leave you alive because then you go and get a new ship and come back. We tended to only be problematic for people who were actually killing other people as pirates. We didn't like that. We like to use fear and take the ship and then send the crew off and, all sorts of things. Anyway. We are tempted at some point to, and we've done some specials of bilge pumps on YouTube, and they're on my channel, but we're probably going to be doing some, could well be some bilge pumps lives if the plans for everything manage to go ahead and everything's successful. Yes, there. Yeah, Dan, that is what we're starting with. Dan is involved, so please note you can ask Dan what we're talking about and what we're planning on doing. And we're on Spotify as well on bilge pumps. Thank you, Shane S99. Right, so thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you, Fushi. Thank you, Melanie, Jack, Dan, Stafford, Sean, Seneca, everyone for doing the admin roles. Glyn, always thank you for being here. Leslie, thank you for being here. Richards, thank you for being here. Carl Van Gasberg, thank you. Night Security Run, DH89, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Runon, thank you. Michael Cooch, thank you. Fushi Smith, thank you, of course. The Ugly Steve, thank you very much. That is a very, very big thank you for that. That is going to be spent on books. Thank you, Alt92, although I should probably be saving it, but it's going to be spent on books. Go Lander, thank you. Duckling95, thank you. Niaku2, thank you. Josvonk, thank you. Bijon, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, my family built ships and did all sorts of other weird things. Pirates and all sorts of fun things. Basically, Andrew Cruz. Yeah, my family had fun. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Innes Morrison. Thank you, everyone. Bye.